without further ado, I am so excited to talk to Norma today. She is a wealth of knowledge, and I know all those single ladies out there are going to be really excited about the conversation today. She is a licensed therapist, a love and relationship coach, and a sound bath practitioner. Hi, Norma. Welcome. How are you?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing so well today. Happy to be here.
We are very, very excited for you to be here. I know we are, going to hit up a few topics that people are very curious about. So, namely, for Latinas, I think it's always hard for us to imagine a career path that isn't that straightforward. You're either a teacher or, something that our parents grew up knowing about. But being a love coach is such a new modern career. Like, how did you get your start?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you're bringing up the cultural piece, right? Because that is part of like my story and my journey as to why it is that I'm even doing like love and relationship coaching. But before that, I'm a therapist. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. And so I've spent over 13 years now focused specifically with providing mental health services to the Latino community. And so in that process, in supporting my clients, I realized that love and relationships is something that affects mental health, right? But it's not something that really is talked about a lot, right? A
Mhm.
lot of the focuses are on other things, right? Wealth, money, right? The milestones, our careers. And so I feel that this specific area, which is one of the top things that we all like strive and want for as human beings, right? Love and connection. So through my work in the therapy world and realizing that this was a topic that kept coming up for me in terms of relationships, whether you are in healthy relationships or even coming out of a separation or breakup or divorce, right? That impact that it has on our overall mental well-being and seeing that there's a need for us to be able to break those patterns that come from conditioning, right? That come from culture, from society, from our familias, even from ourselves, right? We've internalized a lot of this messaging as well. So really seeing that there was a gap in terms of focusing not just on relationship with others, but also that relationship with ourselves, right? Like how are we showing up for ourselves? How are we loving ourselves? Which is a concept that is not typically taught in our families, especially as a Latina, right? We don't talk about our emotions, right? Not all the examples of healthy love isn't necessarily modeled, right? So it's a lot of also being able to have that awareness and break those patterns. And again, in seeing that need, I took that and then created programming specifically around love and relationships to not just attract your dream partnership, but also become that mujer, or even for men too, right? Become that person to be able to receive all the things that you truly want and desire.
So tell me a little bit about those patterns that you talk about in Latinas. Like, what is something that you find time after time after time in the love category for us Latinas?
Yes. There's different parts to it, right? One part of it is our parents, right? In terms of what they modeled, in terms of their relationship. Some of those patterns are about self-sacrifice, right? Putting ourselves last, devoting everything to the partnership and the family, abandoning our needs. It's also perceiving love in a way that it's conditional, right? It's conditional. We have to sacrifice. We have to earn love. We have to stay longer or endure things that maybe more like now the modern women necessarily won't endure anymore. I know I myself personally, like I grew up on watching telenovelas, so just like idolizing, right, the protagonist and their love story, and that you had to get hurt, right? You have to go through this like painful journey to get that happy ending, right? You had to endure, you had to suffer, you had to sacrifice, you had to endure these things, and you had to earn love, right? You had to, in order to be loved, you had to earn it. Those are some of the patterns, especially when it comes with like, if we talk about then unhealthy or toxic patterns, right? In the way that also like machismo, right, shows
Yeah.
up in like the dynamics, right? Jealousy, control. So these patterns are very layered, right? They're very layered in terms of how it shows up. But really, it's about how it is that we are abandoning our own needs, right, to take care of our partner or take care of others before we even prioritize like ourselves in terms of even when it comes to love, right?
Yeah. That's so interesting, and you talk about, what and I agree with you, right? Like, we grew up with women in our families and in our
Mhm.
communities that we knew the husband maybe had a wandering eye or there were other things going on, and it was the woman's job to just stay quiet, be stoic, and put up with that, and you mentioned the tension between, the things we saw growing up and then the modern woman that is like, "I don't have to put up with that. Like, I'm, out in the workforce. I can take care of myself. There's no need." So, are you seeing a lot of that tension in your practice where it's maybe someone that's first generation that is growing up here and kind of has the siren song of the way things are done in the States, but then they're also, having that tension with the way it was done in their homes?
Absolutely. There is, tension of like the tradition, right? The tradition and obviously like the modern society that we live in. And I myself am living proof of that as I am first gen, right? Daughter of Mexican immigrants. But I do see this a lot also with, clients that I work with and even like my friends that I grew up with in that there is this like this struggle, even an identity, right? Like, what do I identify with? Like, what, if there's a part of like still wanting to hold some of that tradition, some of the values, some of that, the chivalry, right? In terms of like how, love is shown at the same time, right? Now that mujeres, women are becoming more educated, they're smarter, they're in the workforce, they have their careers, they have their backbones that now it's also created more choices, right? Of course, I can look back and be like, oh my gosh, like my mom and dad should have, separated a long time ago. Like, I don't know how they're married sustained so long, right? But even if we look at it not just from a cultural perspective, right, in terms of how we value, marriage, right, but also economically, financially, right, especially gender roles, right? If the man is a provider, the woman, is a stay-at-home mom, and that's what was, modeled for me. And knowing that those were the options that maybe like our previous generations have. So sometimes it could be easier to judge that, right? But not really understanding that now we also have choices. We get to choose, right? Because as mujeres, I think we're also not just getting into the workforce and getting educated, but we're also healing, right? We're healing those patterns, right? There's this term, called like breaking generational patterns, right? That not just breaking the cycles of how we show up, but also the cycles of how are we finding ourselves in our relationships, right? Specifically around love and what we are tolerating and not tolerating. But even then, we still find ourselves sometimes in those patterns because that conditioning becomes an unconscious process as well, right? So even though we may say, like, oh, I'll never be like my parents, I'm never going to do that, unconsciously, it may still become a blueprint where you may still act in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly. I think we all, see that in our own lives. It's
Uh-huh.
insane, to think about patterns and how they're so prescribed to us from, decades and decades of seeing something. And even though as a modern woman, you're like, I will never fall in that trap. You're like, wait, I'm becoming my parents. Like, what's happening?
Yeah, especially when, we have, if we bring up even like cheating, betrayal, like that's a whole nother layer too, right? I mean, I know there's a lot of, talk to about even just like famous people who are going through that and how, again, we're quick to already judge and like, I will never do that, right? But really looking at, right, this is also like generational patterns, right? That what we see becomes our reality or our blueprint. And this is where I think the modern women is able to have that choice of like, do I continue that or do I break those cycles? But you have to have awareness of that. Right? You have to know exactly what it is that you're in, right? To even know that there is a change to even have to make.
Yeah, certainly. And, how do you approach working with someone? Like, let's say I'm a single gal and I've been looking for a partner for years and I just have the worst luck and I'm walking into your practice. Like, what is it? Where do you start? It just feels like a problem that is impossible to tackle, right? So, how do you work with women, that are in that position?
Yeah. So I with all my clients, regardless of what they're coming in, but specifically around like love and relationships, like I meet them where they're at. Right. So I meet them where they're at in terms of like what is it that they're coming in with, understanding What are their patterns? What are they struggling with? What is like their blueprint? Really understanding what is the messaging, the conditioning around love, around relationships. And starting there gives a good kind of, again, their blueprint of like, where does this come from? Right? Where does it begin? And once we have that awareness, then we can work on, okay, how do we then start shifting or breaking those patterns? A lot of the work that I focus on is nervous system somatic, right? So not just understanding something like in an intellectual level. So I do see that a lot of successful, smart, self-aware women that already have done the therapy, have done inner work, are coming to me and are like, Norma, like, what is happening? Like, I'm doing everything right. I'm self-aware. I have the career, right? And so what's happening is that intellectually, you may understand and have that awareness, but the work that is missing is that connection to the body, the somatic, right? Soma, which means body, connecting to your nervous system. How is your nervous system responding, right? When you are in relationship to others, right? Is your nervous system in this anxious fight or flight, like your guards up, right? Are you emotionally available yourself, right? So it's also, what it is that we're attracting is a reflection of ourselves, right? In terms of our own availability and our own patterns that are showing up. So really it's connecting that like, okay, so you understand this, but what does that mean in terms of like your body, your spirit on a cellular level?
Is this where practices like sound bath come in to kind of help regulate?
Yeah. So the beauty about, healing is that there's so many modalities, right? There's so many modalities. There's not, one that's like necessarily like wrong or the best. It's about understanding the needs of my client, right? So if they're coming in with a lot of like anxiety, right? A lot of nervous system, like fight or flight, edge, worries, their body's really feeling. So something like a sound bath is something that I can incorporate, right? Especially if they have a hard time relaxing, they need to calm their body, they need to connect to what's happening internally. Sound bath is one way, and a sound bath is a journey through sound of different instruments that have vibrations, frequencies, and when that hits your body, it creates these like wave soothing sensations that help your body relax. It gets you from a state of being alert to a place of a more deeper, meditative, sometimes falling asleep type of feeling. And so the sound bath journey can help in that process to help regulate. So it is something that I do incorporate based on like the needs of the client, along with like other like trauma informed, again, nervous system specific like strategies and tools that can be supportive, but really focusing on the body, right?
Focusing on the body, yeah. That's, I think, something new for us
Yeah.
Latinas, right? I don't think we were having those conversations with our moms if we came home stressed from school or anyone in our family for that matter. I think sometimes it feels like too woo-woo for our community, but there's so much science rooted. And when you calm your nervous system and, after having practices that do that, where you can get to mentally. So I love that you're teaching our community. And, I know we talked a little bit about women before, but there's another side of the coin, right? It's the partners of those women. So, is there, a world or something, a practice that you have to help partners as well, or do you mostly focus on women?
The majority of my work is with women. However, I do believe that men also, right, or the partners also need a place, right, like to heal, to process. However, it can be out of our control, right? Like we can try to tell our partners, right, like what we need and what, our own healing journey is like, right? But we can't, force anyone, to go. The best thing is with like if you're already in a relationship and you find that there are like difficulties or struggles and they're not willing or open to try their own like healing journey, the best thing is that as a partner, being able to model and share your experiences, model and share like how you're expressing, how you're communicating, how you're regulating. So there is There's self-regulation, right? Things that you do within yourself to regulate, like deep breathing, movement, right? Sometimes even like just connecting to your body. There's also co-regulation. So you can also regulate with your partners. So even when you are doing things together, kind of exchanging that energy, right? So imagine just, let's say together, right? We're breathing, right? Together, we are doing an activity. So that in itself, without necessarily having to be like this whole like processing therapy thing already, because a lot of it too is the way that we connect on a cellular level.
That's so interesting because I feel that sometimes, one partner can be enlightened, let's call it, and they go on a healing journey. And if the other one isn't coming along, it can feel a bit of a lost cause.
Yeah.
But modeling opens up a whole new door for you to continue trying to make things work with your partner. So, what are, a few, do you have any tips and tricks for someone trying to start modeling in their relationship?
Yeah, I mean, one thing about relationship, like communication, right? Communication is one of the biggest strategies that you can have in terms of even just how you're communicating, right? So something that I like to use a lot with the clients that I work with, whether you're a man or woman, is using like I statements, right? A lot of the time, right, we come in with judgment. Why are you doing this and why are you doing that and how come this? And so with the I statements, it's a way to own your experience, right? Like, I feel frustrated when you go out, and you don't tell me what's going on because that makes me feel like you don't care. And what I would like from you is just to communicate to me like where you're at. So what I did right there is that I kind of narrated everything that's going on. I'm expressing to you how I feel when you describe their behavior. What is it that they did to contribute to how you feel? Because the impact, why does their behavior impact you? And then you end it with like your need. What do you need in this moment?
I love that formula. And I don't think I've ever heard anyone put it that
Okay.
succinctly.
Yeah, so when you break it down that way, you kind of you kind of like take a moment to process it. Okay, well, what's coming up for me? I know I'm feeling a certain way, right? But it really takes you to like a moment to slow down. Okay, what's happening? How am I feeling? Why am I feeling that way? What is going on? And what do I need? So it
And I love that in the process of modeling, you're also kind of looking deep in yourself, like, okay, why is this actually bothering me? Like, do I care that I didn't get the text message? No. But does it make me feel like he doesn't care? Yes. So I like that idea of, breaking it down in that formula. Any other fast tips and tricks that you have that seem to work very well in relationships?
yes, well, one of my favorite techniques that I love using. It's more like a self-regulation, but you can also do it like in partnership. It's called the butterfly hug. And so essentially what the name says, like you kind of like you hug yourself like a butterfly. You your hands, you interlock them into a butterfly. You put them on your chest. And then so again, you're like hugging yourself. And as you're doing this, right, you tap yourself in a slow rhythmic to kind of bring like soothe you, right? And as you're tapping, of course, you always want to breathe. And just doing that really just grounds you. So when there's tension in a relationship, there's something going, even before you even express yourself, right? Taking a moment to, okay, let me pause, let me check in, let me breathe, let me connect to myself, especially the heart space, right? This is where there's love, compassion, forgiveness. Being able to just kind of connect yourself with your own body in itself, like it already brings this like calming, right? Feeling to it. So when we are in relationships, right, we want to also be able to show up from a place where we're more grounded and regulated versus reactive. So it's our responsibility, right, to first regulate ourselves and then come to like, hey, this is what's going on, right? Versus just being reactive. Then it's a argument, then it's a whole thing. And the thing about, relationships is that relationships are mirrors to ourselves, right? It mirrors to us the things that triggers us. And typically a trigger, it comes from a place of there's a need that hasn't been met, whether it's a need within the relationship or it's a need that hasn't been met from past child wounds, traumas, anything that's happened in your past. So sometimes we may be responding to something that has nothing to do with what's actually happening in this dynamic. And it's more about like something that's coming up in your past, if that makes sense.
I love being conscious of that because sometimes our partners get, to deal with the trauma that they didn't create,
Yeah.
right? It can be childhood, it can be past relationships, and the poor partners are just bewildered as to why we're reacting that way.
So we just take lots of consciousness, it's awareness, right? And learning how can we be together knowing that we're both coming in, right, with our own stuff, right? And when in partnership, like you mentioned earlier, when someone is healing or doing the healing journey, you can see the difference, right? And sometimes what happens is that creates more tension. So either like you grow together or you can grow apart or you just remain in that cycle of just tension.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. These are all fantastic, actionable things that we can take into our next conversation with our partners, or if we are in
Uh,
that stage where we don't necessarily have a partner and haven't settled, but are looking,
yeah.
for that. You gave us a lot of take homes and also a lot of knowledge about why, as Latinas, we can, take a certain role in a relationship. So talk to us about what you have coming up. I know, we chatted about that a little bit earlier. Give me some info.
Yeah. So for the first time ever, I've created a group program called Magnetic Mujer Society for single mujeres who are ready to attract that dream partnership, relationship husband. This program is really unique because you get to heal in community. Right? A lot of the times, right, it's a one-on-one journey, right, in terms of whether you're working with a therapist or a coach. But here you get to do the work with other mujeres who are in the same journey as you, maybe sharing the similar struggles or similar conditioning, messaging. And not only do you do that together, but you also receive, right, the support, right? Like we're there to be each other's like cheerleaders and motivate and help each other in this process. The group program, of course, right? Like one of the wins is being able to meet that partnership, but the bigger win here is the process within yourself so that you become that mujer who is ready to receive that partnership. So what we focus on is within you, right?
And tell me a few of the benefits of healing in community versus, when you're on your own journey.
Yeah. So one of the biggest thing is like being witnessed, right? Being witnessed, sharing your story, right? And being witnessed by others. That in itself, right? In terms of just being in the essence and presence of the energy of the room, of the feedback that you receive, right? Because it's not just like, oh, you're you're telling me this just because you're my therapist or coach, right? Like they're also hearing it from other, live experiences from like other, women that are in there. And then you also get to be vulnerable, right? Vulnerability is a really hard thing, especially in our culture, right? We don't talk about our emotions. We don't show our emotions, right? So that witnessing part is huge because you're not just showing up for you, you're also practicing showing up in a community that is supportive, that is safe. And again, you do this together, right? And being able to connect to like, oh my gosh, like I resonate with that. Or I know exactly what you're talking about. That in itself creates this impact of like, wait a minute, like it's not so isolating. Like I'm not the only one going through this, right? There's other women, other people that are feeling the same way, that are having these things happen to them, right? So that in itself is healing. The relationship that's created is healing in the therapy world and I think anywhere. Like one of the most researched and effective strategies is the relationship. There being trust in their relationship, right? Like you trusting that is more therapeutic than any intervention that anyone can ever do.
I
And that's
love you.
created in this program: safety, trust, connection, empowerment. And then you get to have fun, right? So if depending on where you are in your journey, right, going on a speed dating event together, right? So there's a lot of opportunity too, not just to like heal, but also like to put into practice.
I love that, and everybody can find you at Normally Healing, NORMALY_healing on Instagram, and they can learn a lot more about the program there, and I'm so excited. Thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I loved having this conversation. Let's continue having this conversation because it's so important. Especially May is Mental Health Awareness Month, right? So it's important that we are able to, talk about our emotions, talk about love, talk about money, talk about all things that as humans, right, we experience.
Thank you so much, Norma.
You're welcome.